Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Chandax, Crete, March 961. Deep beneath the walls of the emir's heavily fortified capital, a small, elite group of Roman engineers complete the final digging on their massive tunnel network. The tunnel spans the entire width of Chandax's city walls. Wet earth supported by heavy wooden beams that are now covered in flammable pitch and oil. As the last engineer exits the mine, he throws a torch in to ignite the structural supports. From his position overlooking the enemy fortress, General Nikephoros Phokas can see the smoke pouring from the man-made mine entrance. He knows it is almost time. He orders his catapults to fire another barrage of human heads into the city, to further demoralize the enemy at the sight of their own decapitated battle dead. His men are arrayed before him, glistening in heavy armor, their spears, swords, and banners at the ready. There is a huge crash as the castle walls come falling down, collapsing into a heap of stone and a massive cloud of dust. Phokas orders his signalmen to blow the horn for attack, and his men charge into the breach. After nearly 100 years, Crete will soon be in imperial hands once again. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week, the show where we tell the badass history of badasses. I am joined today by my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yes, we are here today, and we have a very special guest. And Pat, I think the person we're talking to today might be like our most famous history guest that we've ever had on the show, which is very exciting.
Quite possibly, yes.
So we are joined today by Robin Pierson, a man you probably know better and might recognize his voice better as the History of Byzantium guy. Robin, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's really amazing to have you here talking to us.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So, Robin, I've been listening to your show for, I don't know, years. My brother's like an insane fan. He got me into it, I think, probably like a decade ago. And so we've been kind of following this journey of Byzantium on your podcast. Can you kind of talk about your background and what got you interested in Byzantium to begin with?
Sure. I am someone who spent the first 2.5 years of my college degree saying to people, I don't know what I'm going to do for a job when I leave here. And people all said, oh, that's good. Keep an open mind. You know, you could do anything. And then for the last few months, whenever I said that, people went, well, you're nearly finished. You really should know what you're going to do now. And I still didn't. And of course, my college degree was politics, which is a bit like a history degree, where I was researching things and writing essays every week. And for whatever, the 10 years after that, I thought, yeah, this was a really useless degree. And now that's exactly what I do every day. Researching and writing essays.
Byzantine history has a lot of politics involved.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a little bit of history at college, but mainly sort of politics. And it didn't really lead to anything. I ended up working for my dad, who is an actor, and I was kind of his manager and his PA and everything. And I got into podcasting as something just to do for fun. But as his work slowly moved towards retirement, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Because I'm pretty unemployable, having worked just for him for years. And so I tried to turn the podcasting into something that could be a living. And my favorite show at the time was The History of Rome by Mike Duncan.
Oh, yeah.
The legendary podcast. And he announced he was going to finish. And I messaged him immediately saying, don't do that. Carry on and do, the history of Byzantium that comes after Rome. And he said, no, thank you. And about a month later, I thought, oh, is that something that I could do? Because there's that is something I want to listen to. Maybe other people want to listen to it too. And so I jumped in, and I've been doing it for 13 years since.
Wow. So I guess we should kind of ask why Byzantium? What was
Yeah.
that? Just because it's the next logical step?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been into history since childhood, and the Romans are always around in church as well as on Ben-Hur or whatever's on television. And
how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Yeah, exactly, all the time.
Yes.
And so I was always interested, and I did read Roman history books, but nothing really stuck. The famous stories were in there, but it was only Mike Duncan's podcast that tied everything together. I remember reading A History of Rome, the whole thing, and by the end, you can't remember what you learned at the beginning because it's so much information. And his podcast kind of held your hand and built little bridges between the stories, and suddenly the whole thing clicked, and lots of things became fascinating that I hadn't really understood before. And so I just really wanted to continue that story. I did know the outline of what happened next, but it was mainly, that interest in Roman history that became a passion through listening to that podcast. And I just really wanted to see what happened next. And I just fascinated.
And one thing that he did really well, and that you also do, is to try to, when I talk about, I write a lot of books for like middle school, high school age kids. And when I go and do talks at schools, I say that, history is, in a lot of ways, when you learn it, it's a bunch of old dead white guys and you have to memorize their birthdays. And I think what you do really well, and what History of Rome did really well, is to make these stories about real people. And, I feel like if you can, like you said, when you read some of the more dense histories, it's like, oh, which guy was that? Which Justinian were we talking about now? I know he's a Constantine, but was this 5 or 7? I can't remember. But if you give him a cool epithet, or you're like, oh, that's the guy who had that one thing going on with his eye, like that's all of a sudden you can start to piece those stories together and remember them a little better. And I feel like that's something that you've done really well on your show as well.
Thank you.
So what's your process like? What sources do you use? What's the relationship between secondary sources, primary sources? Do you have a favorite primary source, even if it's wildly biased, as primary sources often are?
Yeah. So I like to work backwards. I like to start with the most up-to-date and best written modern history, and then follow the footnotes, because I find if I read the primary source first, I'm often groping for quite what's going on or what the context is. And so it's easier to go backwards. Once I have a sense of what the context is, then I can read the words and you get what's going on. Especially as some Byzantine writers will use these very complex references to things either in the Bible or in Homer or in Plato. And so if you just read an English translation of that, you're just like, what is he talking about?
It's pop culture from like 975. Like everybody knows this story of this guy who lives in this town. And it's just literally like a dude that lived in the next neighborhood over that had like an affair. Yeah. And you're reading it in 2,000 years later and you're like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Like the way these days, we would totally get a Star Wars reference or a Seinfeld reference or an oblique reference to, some celebrity, but that's because we're...
Right. Pat will do that sometimes with her. She'll be like, oh, that's Ovid. And I'm like, oh, obviously. Obviously, that's an Ovid reference.
That's a really good analogy, though, because I've just done a Reddit AMA, and, people will put a quote from a Marvel film or something in response to something that happened in Byzantium. And that's not a million miles from what Byzantine historians are doing. They're making literate references that only someone who's following the same literary culture as them would get. And so it can be lost on you if you're not following along with footnotes. I kind of work backwards, and it usually takes me a week to do an episode of narrative. Anything more than that, anything that requires more research, then spirals out beyond a week and causes problems to the schedule. But my favorite primary sources are probably Procopius, who is the chronicler of Justinian's era.
Justinian the First.
Justinian the First, because he's one of the better writers, very clear, and his analogies and references are quite cutting and interesting because he's very critical of Justinian. And then there's a writer called Michael Psellos, so like Psellos, Ellos, who is a incredibly intelligent, well-read guy, and he likes you to know it. But he's one of the few Byzantine writers who writes a bit like Suetonius or Tacitus, one of the early Roman writers, who writes about the emperor's personalities.
Ooh, fun.
Based on like actual anecdotes from people he knew who knew that the emperor and so on. And we often miss that. Like often Byzantine histories are written by churchmen in a sort of chronicle style. And so you get a kind of blankness around the emperor's personality sometimes. So those are the two best I would recommend if people are looking to read more.
So Procopius and Psellos.
Yeah.
That was one thing that always kind of drew me to Gibbon with his history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which is where he just like, he's just like, this guy was cool, this guy sucked, this guy I liked, this guy did something dumb. It's very different than trying to read, like you said, a chronicle or even like a textbook where it's like, some people didn't agree with this. And I like reading it when the guy's just like, this was stupid.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't agree with that guy. Maybe we realize that guy is writing a thing, like you have the context of this guy doesn't like that guy and is being paid by his usurper to make that guy look bad. But I always like to get that. I always feel like you can gain a lot of interesting insight from those types of stories.
Yeah.
So here you're here to talk to us about, in Greek, Nikephoros Phokas, but in English, I think we're more likely to hear his name pronounced Nikephoros Phokas.
Yeah.
Is that how you prefer? Yeah.
That's how I ended up saying it.
Yeah.
I should probably have learned ahead of time and called him Nikephoros Phokas with the accent and everything, but we'll stick with...
This is where... No, we're in an English-speaking audience, and, we are people who pronounce Julius Caesar's name as Julius Caesar, so which would have been incomprehensible to a Roman of Julius Caesar's actual time. So roll with it. I just wanted to get that out there.
Pat speaks Latin and ancient Greek, and
amazing.
And she pronounces all the words correctly in foreign languages.
Love it.
So she's kind of our go-to reference on these things.
Language nerd. Yeah.
Yes.
But Nikephoros Phokas, tomato, of all of the fascinating figures from Byzantine history, why did you choose him to talk about today with us?
Because I thought he was most fitting of the term badass in Byzantine history.
Yes.
A lot of those earlier pre-Byzantine Roman figures, pre-Christian figures, did a lot of conquering and badass things. A lot of Byzantine emperors are kind of on the defensive and they're up against it. A lot of them cultivate an image of piety or stay in the palace. Nikephoros Phokas is a badass in every sense of the word, and he does a lot of killings, and he also has an interesting end. So I think he really fits your podcast theme.
Absolutely. When I first contacted Robin, I was asking for who's like the most badass guys, and so we've talked on the show. We've talked about Justinian II, who is a complete bastard, but I like him even though he's a bastard. I don't know. I find his story compelling. And we haven't done Belisarius yet. I feel like we have to at some point in the future. And you were like, oh, you already did Basil the Bulgar Slayer. So we've got to do Nikephoros Phokas. So that's what we're going to do. We have to take a really quick break for some ads. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Nikephoros Phokas, the pale death of the Saracens. So it's the most badass war hero that the History of Byzantium guy can think of in Byzantium, so it's probably pretty good. So stick with us. All right, welcome back to Badass of the Week. We are here with Robin Pierson, and we are going to talk about Nikephoros Phokas, the pale death of the Saracens. So, Robin, I guess to set this up, we should talk a little bit about more or less what is the Byzantine Empire and what does it look like at this time? And generally, what time is it? Like, what's the year when the story begins?
So we're in the 900s AD for this particular story. And so for a listener who's thinking, Julius Caesar is like a few years BC, right? And we're now 900 years later. What's going on? basically in 330 AD.
Pax Romana, right? It's Pax Romana.
Yeah.
1,000 years of peace.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. So, the Roman Empire at its height covers all of the Mediterranean. That's kind of what makes it a great empire, that they control all the shores of the sea. And in 330 AD, the Emperor Constantine founds a new Rome, a new capital, which becomes Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. And he's basically saying the empire's too big. It's too big to rule from Rome or even from one of the kind of military towns that become where the emperors live as times get difficult. And so when the western half of the empire starts to fall apart in the sort of 400s AD, Constantinople is able to keep the eastern half of the Mediterranean together and under Roman rule. So you have this slightly odd situation where Rome has gone, Latin speakers have gone, but the Eastern Mediterranean, where the elites speak Greek, is still Roman. The elites consider themselves Roman. They call themselves Roman. Their capital is the new Rome. And so everything to them seems pretty normal until the 600s AD, when a series of events which we obviously cannot talk about leads to the rise of Islam and a caliphate forming, which, as you probably know, ends up spreading Islam through the Middle East and on into Pakistan and eventually Indonesia, and then the other direction all across North Africa. So this is like one of the great revolutions of world history. And
Absolutely.
This leaves...
We did a recent episode on Abdurrahman, who was the emir of Cordoba in Spain.
So, and any of you who've been listening to your Justinian II episodes know Justinian II is kind of 2 generations on from this absolute shock to the system. Mm-hmm. And so what's left of this Eastern Mediterranean Roman Empire is basically what we would now think of as Greece and Turkey. That they've lost everything that, we now think of as the Middle East. That's gone. And the Balkans has been invaded and occupied by various Slavic tribes. So we're left with kind of Greece and Turkey. And the Romans are fine. They're secure there. They continue to call themselves Romans. This seems normal to them.
They just call themselves Romans in Greek.
Exactly. Which is no problem to them, because there never was a Greek nation state the way there is now. So...
Yeah.
That's
true. I never really considered that, but it was always the city-states, and so there was no overarching Greek national identity.
So their language was Greek. They understood that. They understood ancient Greek people had spoken it. But foreigners would say that's the Roman language because that's what the Romans spoke. So it's one of those weird things. But basically, what had happened between the Romans and the Caliphate was that the border had settled on the mountains in what's now eastern Turkey, so were the Taurus Mountains. And basically the Arabs, what we now think of as jihad, was kind of formed by raids going over those mountains into Roman territory. The Arabs had kind of accepted they weren't going to conquer the empire, but they could use it as a sort of raiding ground. And this had gone on for 300 years by the time our story begins. So the Romans were a very different state now. They were very battle-hardened, very militarized in the culture of what is, today modern Turkey, but then was Roman Anatolia.
And what you said is really interesting of, talking about why you picked Nikephoros, because he's an attacking general, because as you've mentioned, the Roman Empire, we have all I feel like everybody thinks about the Roman Empire. We can picture what that big map looks like with the Mediterranean. And then the eastern side splits off. But like you said, the Islamic conquests, now we're being pushed. We've got Bulgars to the west of us, Saracens to the east of us. They're losing land and they're just trying to hold on to what they've got left. And this mountain range ends up being kind of a dividing line, but they're still raiding back and forth. But we're kind of on the defensive at this point in the story.
Absolutely. And essentially the caliphate, which is based in Baghdad as its capital, starts to fall apart and break apart, as most normal empires do.
And we saw this with the Abdurrahman, where the Abbasids take over, and Abdurrahman creates the Emirate of Cordoba, which is a separate Arab kingdom which can be confusing sometimes for people who are studying from a very European-centric background, because to the Europeans, they're all the Saracens, they're all the Muslims, the Arabs, and they all just get along and they all hate us. But in reality, it's very splintered and different kingdoms and caliphates and organizations and emirates that don't always see eye to eye.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is a period when Spain is a very Muslim place and Turkey is a very Christian place, and it's confusing times. But yeah, basically the context for Nicephorus's upbringing is that the tide has started to turn, that with the caliphate in decline, the number of men going on the annual jihad into Roman territory, where they kind of ride around, steal cattle, try to enslave people, and then go home. It's not really...
Yeah, again, with the cattle raids, I just want to interrupt that. To our listeners, if you're following along on your Badass of the Week bingo card, I feel like cattle raids comes up from time to time. So yeah, you can tick that off. Okay.
Yeah, we do have Robin. like a 10th century, like medieval, Dark Ages, whatever, like bingo card. And I think we're going to hit a lot of the stuff on this episode.
Oh, this is not just a medieval thing. Cattle raids are, I mean, we had cattle raids in the Lars Porsena Rome versus the Etruscans episode.
Yeah, that's true. I guess you have like cattle raids and like cowboy times and stuff too. So this is just across the board.
Absolutely.
We're going to see heads on pikes. We're going to see all the good stuff.
So these raids are, maybe there aren't as many guys available for them, and so what next?
So they're beginning to peter out, and Nicephorus is born about 50 years after the tide has started to turn. So he is born in 912 AD. And so the story of his life in a broad sense is that by the time he's a man, the Romans are now the ones doing the bigger raids, and he becomes the raider par excellence. And so that is kind of where we are and what's going to lead to him becoming this embodiment of badassery.
And he's kind of part of that. So his family is a military family that is from this frontier region that is being raided by these jihads, by these cross mountain raids. And the Phokas family, I feel like, they're bad focuses, or I don't know. I feel like I keep wanting to make like I keep feeling like there's a mother Phokas joke in here, but I haven't found it just yet.
Absolutely.
But they're a bad group of dudes. Like these are tough guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cappadocia is where his family's from, which today you'll see on the front cover of travel brochures with balloons flying over these crazy rock formations.
They did not have balloons back in those days.
They did
not.
That
was a later invention, yes.
Absolutely. And so for a long time, this was the very front line. And people, the ancestors of Nicephorus Phokas would have been really hunkered down, trying just to survive, trying to move their animals every year away from the raids that are coming. He's now born into a rich landowning family with a history of military service who are thinking, actually, we can go into Arab territory and start stealing and enslaving and become really rich and powerful. And it's his... And
at the same time, stop these raids from coming into our lands.
Exactly. And so his great-grandfather is the first Phokas who appears in the records as a military officer. And by the time we get to his father and uncle, they are actually potential usurpers for the throne. His uncle is arrested for trying to become emperor around the time Phokas is a little boy, and that fails, but his father continues on and is a high-ranking officer as Phokas is growing up and learning to ride and hunt and become a young soldier himself.
His father's name is Bardus, which I note because every time I typed it in my notes, it would autocorrect to badass, which I thought was interesting. Bardus, that's not a real word. Did you mean badass? Yes, I guess I did. And Bardus is an interesting character, and he raises Nicephorus and his other side. Like Nicephorus has brothers who are also going to be great warriors, and they're raised in this frontier. We made a cowboy joke earlier, but like they're kind of raised in that style of you're on the frontier, you're on a war, you're going to grow up to be a warrior, you're going to grow up to be a general, a knight, So they're trained in fighting, and they're given religious training, they're given combat training, horseback riding, bow and arrow hunting, all of those things. And he rises through the ranks, and his father becomes pretty powerful in the region. And so we are in the reign of the Emperor Constantine. Is that correct? Yes, absolutely. And so the Saracens are fragmented. He's serving with his dad, and there's a guy in charge of the Saracens on the other side of this mountain, and he has a name that is extremely long, but luckily gets shortened down to something a little bit more manageable. Yeah, so he's Saif ad-Dawla, or Saif al-Dawla, which is actually an epithet meaning sword of the dynasty. So, which is awesome. Which is a great epithet. Yeah. And so the dynasty he is the sword of is the caliphate in Baghdad, the what's left of the caliphate at this point. And so he's been appointed to kind of run that frontier with the Romans. So he lives in Aleppo, and he is kind of faced with this growing threat of the Roman state sending raids into his lands. So Nicephorus' father Bardas is basically the senior general for the Romans at this point, between 944 and 954. And so he's leading raids over into Syria, and Saif ad-Dawla is leading raids over, back into Anatolia. And what's happening here is that the Romans are kind of better organized. They're closer to the mountains, and so they start to be able to work out where these raiders are going to go home. So they've come into eastern Turkey, we'd now call it. They've stolen people and animals, and now they're marching home. But you've got to cross these huge mountain ranges, and so at some point you have to go through very narrow passes. And the Romans, if they can predict which pass you're going to use, they can ambush you in the passes. And, basically 1,000 men could ambush an army of 10 or 15,000, because the passes mean you have to walk, 2, 3, 4 deep only. And if you can get somewhere ahead of them and then pile up rocks and trees and things and block that path, they then start to panic because they're thinking an attack's coming any minute, and people, when they panic, will just run and drop everything they're holding, and they won't fight together. If they stood still and just fought, they would wipe you out because you've only got a few men. And so the Romans can still lose a battle to Saif ad-Dawla, but when it comes to these ambushes, the Romans start to really turn the tables and do incredible damage to the Arabs as they try to leave Roman territory. And Bardas and his sons become the experts at these operations. And so they're having big victories here, which are gaining a lot of renown and triumphs, not necessarily for the Phokas family, but for the emperor back home. He's triumphing himself quite often, how awesome it is that all of these, my armies have won for me, and they're bringing all this treasure back for us. And so Nicephorus is part of Bardas's army. He's an officer, and he's leading his own little raiding parties, and he's having some success. And the Phokas family is becoming more popular back home from these successes, even if the emperor is sometimes taking credit for them. Now, it's not 100% victories all the time. I think Nicephorus doesn't lose any, but I think at one point his brother is captured. Is that correct? That's right. So he's got two brothers, Leo and Constantine, and Constantine gets captured by Saif in 953 and ends up dying in captivity. And that defeat kind of prompts the emperor to say, maybe it's time Bardas retires. He's been beaten several times, and this is a humiliation. And so the emperor appoints Nicephorus in his place. And there's an apocryphal story that he calls Nicephorus to him and says, why do we keep losing
on the Eastern Front, and that Nikephoros says, because my father is an old man and because you know nothing about military matters. So he probably didn't say that, but it's not that out of character as something he would say. And
we are not above putting words in characters in people's mouths in this podcast. Yes.
It fits. It feels like it fits him.
Absolutely. And it is true that once he is in charge, he very rarely loses anything. And so the next sort of 6 years, he leads these very savage raids into Arab territory. And so, on the one hand, he's leading them in, he's burning crops, he's massacring people, soldiers who resist. He's enslaving normal people. He's stealing anything he finds, including animals. And on the other hand, he is very pious. He's a very serious Christian who is he's very fond of his uncle, who is a proper ascetic monk, who lives on the side of a mountain and eats nothing and just prays all day. And so Nikephoros is telling his armies, we are doing God's work. He makes them pray before, they go into battle. He's having...
That's a way to focus the mind.
Well, there you go. So
that's what you did there. Pat is like the pun queen of New England.
There you go. But I think this sort of makes him a more terrifying figure to his own men and to the Arabs, because he's not just greedy and sort of glory hungry. He also is imbued with a very serious sense of religious mission. And so there's no sense of like, oh, we'll compromise with him, we'll bribe him, we'll distract him. It's like, no, he's coming for you. And those 6 years are pretty brutal, and he doesn't lose a battle. And it's pretty clear that Saif ad-Dawla is not able to stop him from raiding.
And he is no nonsense, as you said. Like that quote that might not be a real quote from him, but it gets the message across that he is a very straightforward guy. He is a military general first. He is a soldier. He likes to be in his tent on campaign. And he grew up fighting and riding on the frontier, and he knows army. He's grown up in the army, and that's what he knows. He's totally fine sleeping in a sleeping bag on the ground. And interestingly, he said that he was a vegetarian, which almost doesn't fit with this, because I feel like he'd need the calories.
Absolutely. This was something that a lot of Christians did at this time, was you only ate meat on feast days. You didn't eat meat in Lent, and that sort of thing. And monks would give up meat altogether. And so we're not entirely sure if he was completely vegetarian, but that's what it was said of him. And some people say that he became a vegetarian after his son died, that he was married and he did have a son, and he died in a hunting accident. So it's difficult to say, but he seriously, he took his religious duties very seriously.
It should be a very interesting story, because he's a younger man at this point when he's commanding an army. And he has a wife and a son. His wife dies, and his son is killed in a hunting accident. And then for him to give up meat after that, like, I'm never going to eat meat again because my son was killed hunting. Like, I don't know. That feels powerful to me.
Absolutely. People absolutely took causality seriously in a way that we find very difficult, because we have stripped that away in our culture. That we would say, well, accidents happen, and, illnesses happen, and, and so on. But people in Byzantium did not really believe in accidents, that this must have happened for a reason.
God does not want you to eat meat anymore.
Well, yeah, if that is true, he obviously blamed himself on some level. So
I think Nuno, we just did Nuno Alvarez de Pereira. He's a Portuguese knight from the
deeply religious,
like the 1300s. I think he was a vegetarian too. I think he gave up, he became a monk after his career. He won a bunch of battles for Portugal against Spain, and then I think he became a monk and gave up meat as well.
Right.
So who knew? Badass vegetarians.
So kind of the
new category.
one of the big highlights, and possibly a sort of turning point in his life, is 960, when he is chosen to lead an amphibious invasion of Crete. So the island of Crete had been captured by sort of Muslim pirates sort of 140 years earlier. And the Byzantines had made 2 attempts to take it back, both of which had failed. Navies are very expensive, and to put a bunch of soldiers on them is even more expensive. And neither mission had quite had the resources to get the job done. And
this is a big embarrassment, right? Because Crete might even be like the seat of like where Greece came from, right? It's always been Greek. It's always been Roman. And to lose that to these pirates is embarrassing for Byzantium. They can't retake it. That's embarrassing. And on a more practical standpoint, there are, like you said, there's pirates in Crete who are attacking shipping. So it's annoying for the people who live in Constantinople on a much more than just their honor. Like every ship they're sending to go trade might get hit by these pirates. Like, you got to do something about this.
Absolutely. And I mean, even worse, they can raid the coast of Roman territory. And your justification for taking people's tax money is that we defend you. And so this has been a running sore for a long time. And Phokas is chosen to lead this invasion, and they land, and they can't break in to the capital. The Arab capital is called Chandax. And so they have to stay through the winter, which is always a very dangerous time for an army, because you're living in tents and you're having to forage for food. And if you stay in one place too long, people get dysentery and all these horrible things. And the Arabs have people in the mountains and elsewhere who are sort of attacking them, from the rear. And Phokas makes it through all of that. And eventually, when spring comes, so this is March 961, his men manage to undermine the walls. So you dig under the walls, you prop it
literally
up.
Undermine the walls.
Yeah. You put all these wooden props in to hold up the soil, and then you set fire to them all, and the walls, or at least a section of them, just drop. They fall down.
That's how you do it.
And you just rush through the breach. So even a small breach, just the shock of it can lead to the city falling, and that's what happens. And this is obviously an amazing victory for the Romans. Phokas is allowed a triumph. So you mentioned this is an era, because the Romans were finally winning again after 300 years of never winning anything. They've been holding these processions in the capital where victorious generals, or mostly the emperors, walk through the streets. Everybody throws flowers, and the emperor scatters money. All this, this is the Met Gala, the Oscars, everything all rolled into one. For,
Yeah.
And Phokas is given his own triumph, and so that makes him a massive figure. The reason generals weren't usually allowed this is because it might make them seem like they should maybe be the next emperor.
Don't want him to be too popular. It becomes like the emperor is the reason we won this battle is because of the emperor. The general was just doing what the emperor wanted him to do. That's kind of
absolutely. And basically 2 years later, the emperor, who is in his 20s, dies completely unexpectedly, and so there is a child emperor on the throne, which is Basil II, who you have already covered. And in Byzantine politics, it is believed, you must get another man in to run the empire until this child comes of age. And so naturally...
Right. My kid's 4.5. You really don't want him running anything.
No, exactly.
You don't want him to have absolute power of anything.
Yeah.
It's just going to eat chocolate ice cream all day long. It'll never end.
Yeah. Weren't there some women who were regents from time to time? Or?
Absolutely. So there was nothing to stop the empress from running things, but you needed everyone to be on the same page. There's a strange thing about the Romans, that they never shed the system that Augustus set up, where clearly the emperor is the monarch. He has not quite absolute power, but he has all the power in the state. But it's still an office. There's no legal succession process. And if an emperor is overthrown and people accept his successor, then that is considered legal. So if a woman is in charge and say she, her brother is running the army, or her brother is the patriarch, or her brother runs the administration, you can keep people happy. They don't mind it being the empress who's in charge, But if one part of the state starts to doubt her or work against her, it's very hard then to hold the political coalition together. So empresses are rarely in charge alone. They usually need someone else who controls the army to work with them.
You need swords to hold the office.
And so in this case, the emperor's mother is she's not from a powerful family. So she doesn't have the kind of relatives who could help her run the state. And so their clamor goes up for Nikephoros. Obviously, he is the bringer of victory, as they're calling him at this point, which is a slight pun on...
That's what Nikephoros means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a pun on his name.
Is that what Nikephoros means?
Yeah.
So,
Nikephoros like Nike.
Oh, got
so
it.
like
yeah.
Nike, victory, exactly.
It's slowly changing my mental image of him. He's got the swoosh on his armor now.
There you go. Yeah.
So there's two things from the Crete expedition that I want to touch on before we move on, because like we said, like Crete was like, it was 150 years or something since Crete had been lost to these pirates who have been raiding for over a century now. We got to get these guys out of here. There are good God-fearing Christians on this island who are being oppressed by these Muslim pirates, and they're messing up our shipping and they're causing all this trouble. And Greece is, I mean, how can you have Greece without Crete? It's this big island. We need it. It's strategically important. It's politically important. It's, emotionally important to our people. And I love, you talked about this in your show, but it created this amazing mental image that like the landing transports. So the might of Phokas's army is his heavy cavalry. So picture like kind of proto knights, right? These are guys on their heavy armor, armored horses, big lances, right? And so the way you described it on the show, these wooden transports are landing on the beaches at Crete. And I'm picturing like a D-Day ship here with like the front loading ramp, and the ramp goes down and these knights ride off in full armor on horseback, ride off the transports onto the beach to attack whoever's defending it. And I just love that mental image. I would love to see that in a movie somewhere,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously you've got to transport the horses. So you have them, and if you can build a door that is waterproof but can be dropped, then you can get the horses ready. They're very confused, and then the door opens and they run out onto dry land.
But why not, right? And then you were talking about over the winter, they were being harassed by these raiders that were trying to mess up the siege. The Byzantines are able to deal with them. And we have to hit the badass bingo card here, because Nikephoros, before he does that raid, he does bring down a section of wall. He's got a bunch of guys ready to go into that breach and sack the city. But before he does that, to demoralize the enemy while they're stuck besieged in winter, he cuts the heads off of all of the soldiers he kills, all of the raiding party soldiers he kills, puts them, this big pile of heads, into the catapult and launches them into the city to terrify everybody who lives there.
Of course.
Head on pike is the bingo card, but I feel like that works. Yeah. I feel like that's
he skipped the pike and just hurled them over the wall.
Just launch him straight out, launch him out of a catapult. Why not? And so yes, and when he comes back, he's this huge hero. And he also, one other interesting thing about Crete was that the city is sacked, the capital is sacked pretty gruesomely, but he doesn't really seem like he's that excited about sacking the city. There's a story that you told about him running through the Cretan capital, being like, can we stop just wantonly slaughtering everybody that we come across here?
I mean, a bit like Basil II, I think Roman emperors tended to say, if you resist, then you get what's coming to you. You an enemy combatant will be killed, but if you surrender, then we'll treat you well. And so Phokas ideally would say, we enslave people peacefully and we steal all their stuff. That's the best I can offer you now that we've taken your city. But you can't really control an army who are running through a breach. So they're off hacking people who they find, and he has to try and restore order. And that usually takes 2 or 3 days when you sack a city. And he may have had more success than some, because his men were more afraid of him than they were of the enemy.
Yes, that's true. And so, as you mentioned, Romanus II dies. He's 20-something years old. And Basil II is in theory, next in line. He's still co-emperor, I think, but people are like, who are we gonna have? How about that dude who just had that Met Gala parade downtown, the conquering hero, who we've literally named conquering hero Phokas? Why doesn't he take over? And so he steps in and he becomes emperor. Is he considered a usurper, or is he kind of what you said with the empress regent, like he's allowed, like it's okay because everybody says it's okay?
That's the thing. You're a usurper until everyone says now you're emperor, and then you're not. Then it's God's will. And he is in such a powerful position as head of the army and as popular that people break out. There are riots in his favor. His dad is still alive. He's in his 80s, and he goes to the Hagia Sophia, the big cathedral, and asks for sanctuary, and a crowd gathers and guards him, guards the doors. They don't want anyone to get to him. So the officials in the palace who are on his side kind of agitate and basically get him accepted. He sails over, and a few days later he marries the widowed empress, which...
Oh, that's convenient.
Is very convenient because obviously he's a widow, and so is she now. And so that's the neatest way to explain his position in the regency, that he is now...
He marries Theophana, who was the empress's name. And although there are stories that when his son died, he took an oath of no eating meat, and when his wife died, he took an oath of chastity. Yeah, and I'm reminded of I did an interview with Shayna Steinberg about Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she was talking about her first husband in France, and she was like, "You married me to a king, but it turned out he was a monk."
Yes, yes, exactly. So yeah, we have no real insight into their personal relationship, but there's no children. And he, as you say, may well have thought this is just a political marriage. I'm not bothered. He does take her on campaign and the boys, but we think that is to avoid political coups while he's away on the frontier.
Interesting.
So we assume it's a constitutional arrangement. It's difficult to tell. It might be worth describing him physically at this point. Because
yes, we should never do
how
that.
should we picture him? Yeah.
So he is described very rudely by one source. So
I love this.
Yeah. So there's basically an ambassador from Italy called Liutprand of Cremona, who has a very difficult visit to Constantinople. So he has every reason to be rude. But he describes Nikephoros as a man of grim and forbidding aspect, with a swollen and disfigured face, dark complexion, rough demeanor, resembling more a wild beast than a noble general. And he says various other things about him.
I love this guy because he came... So, Pat, for a little context, he went to Constantinople to declare to Emperor Nikephoros Phokas that Otto I of Germany has declared himself Emperor of Rome. He's now in Rome. The Pope has crowned him Emperor of Rome, and he's coming to Constantinople to say, "Hey guys, there's a new Roman emperor. Do you recognize him as the Emperor of Rome?" And they're like, "We kind of already have an Emperor of Rome over here." And then this guy's like, "I don't understand why you don't like me. I don't understand why this is so hard. What's going on here? Why you guys give me such a hard time?"
Absolutely.
And then he's treated rudely, and he writes all this mean stuff about Phokas, and it's always funny.
Absolutely. And he says he smells, and he says he's really short. Anyway, so I think we can take it that the emperor is sort of stocky and broad-shouldered, but a little shorter than you might expect, and he's dark complexion, and he has thick curly hair.
And he's a warrior. Somebody described him as an ox, you said.
That's right. Yeah. Another person calls him an ox. So he's not a classical leading man figure. He is a rough general from the frontier, but
he's Robert Baratheon, right? Like,
yeah,
he won the war, and now he's the king.
There you go. So he's not fat in quite the same way that Robert is, but very, very good analogy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now he's emperor, and he just immediately starts a war with the church, which is not always a great move. So he's the emperor now. He's gonna keep on campaigning. He's gonna make some people mad, It's gonna make a lot of people mad. And we're gonna kind of take a break here, and when we get into it, we're gonna talk about Emperor Nikephoros Phokas, or Nikephoros II, and all of the badass things that he does after he becomes emperor. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Badass of the Week. I am here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish, and we are also here with Robin Pierson from the History of Byzantium. And Robin, we have been following Nikephoros Phokas, and now he is he's emperor, and there's still work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably worth saying one of the reasons he's considered such a badass in a broad sense is that he commissions several texts about how to run campaigns in the East. And so he leaves this legacy of being, a general's general, someone who planned and executed brilliantly, as well as being sort of personally brave. And the first text dealt with the kind of warfare he'd been conducting up to that point, so the raids and the counter raids. And he now, basically over the next few years, he commissions a very different text, which is how to destroy your enemies in standing battles and thus take over their territory, because that's what he's about to do. The Romans have now basically stopped serious raids from coming through, and they want to conquer the towns. So this is now southeast Turkey today, that have been used for centuries to host jihadis. These are towns full of hostels for, volunteers who come all excitedly to go on these campaigns. And this is an area the Romans called Cilicia, which is sort of Mediterranean, nice farmland along the coast opposite Cyprus. And so basically over the next few years, him and his generals conduct these brutal campaigns where they seek out the enemy armies and, quite contrary to normal practice, try to fight them to the death because they know they can win. And the Roman strategy up to this point is all about, if the enemy start to run away, let them go, because you don't want to lose men unnecessarily by trying to fight to the death. And these are very brutal campaigns with heavy cavalry where you try to trap them and destroy them or get them to surrender completely. And as we sort of previewed, he doesn't lose. He reconquers this entire area. This includes Tarsus, where St. Paul was from. And he's incredibly successful and pretty brutal.
And it's kind of a shock because, we've been seeing this never-ending war. We've been seeing these raids for hundreds of years, back and forth, fighting. And then you capture prisoners, you exchange them. There's a whole song and dance around this. We raid into your territory, steal your stuff. You raid into ours. Later, we'll trade guys. And so when he starts raiding and attacking and killing, fighting to the death, all of a sudden people are like, wait, this isn't how we're supposed to do this. This is totally different style of war. This is totally different than what we were expecting. And people start to panic because he's enslaving people. He's sacking these cities. He's killing prisoners. He's destroying mosques. And he gets this reputation among the Arab world of just being this bloodthirsty, brutal guy that is terrifying. And that's where he gets his nickname, the Pale Death of the Saracens, because he makes them white with fear at the mention of his name.
Absolutely. And that gets incorporated into imperial chants about him. Behold, the morning star approaches. In his eyes, the sun's rays are reflected. Nikephoros, our prince, the white death of the Saracens.
Beautiful.
And he loves all that.
I bet. Yeah.
And so, and again, alongside the brutality, there's a slight, there is always that Christian element. So if a city surrenders, which several do, if the Muslim population want to leave, so that your options are, if you want to stay, you can stay and you can keep all your stuff, but you have to become a Christian, because the Romans don't want to rule Muslim populations. And Roman law is entirely based around the idea that everyone is a Christian. Unless you're Jewish, then you have your own rules. So they say, look, you can stay, but you need to convert. And if you want to leave, you can. You can leave under guard and you will be safe, but only if you surrender. If you resist and we have to break in, then you'll be enslaved. So
then you have to leave your stuff behind.
Yeah, exactly. So it's firm but fair at times. And so, I mean, he just is having, these centuries where the Romans had lost territory. Suddenly he is reconquering areas. He reconquers Cyprus, which had sort of been neutral territory for quite a while, and he reincorporates it into the empire. And he conquers several towns, sort of fortress towns over the mountains. So now he has bases in Syria. And he ends up, his army capture Antioch, which is this great Christian city in Syria. And he's kind of annoyed because he wanted to take it himself. His ego is now very, very large. And one of his sub-commanders manages to capture it sort of sneakily and runs back to tell him, I've captured Antioch, and Nikephoros promptly removes him from command because he wanted to be the one to do that.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, what are you doing? You're supposed to wait for me.
Absolutely. So I mean, he is. So I mean, we can start to move into the flip side of the Nikephoros coin, if you like, because that is a kind of
we will. But I kind of want to set this up for a minute because he's moving into Cilicia, which was part of the Byzantine Empire, was part of the Roman Empire. He's moving in there. He's taking towns. He's defeating the sword of the dynasty, like the guy that killed his brother. He's defeating him in battle. He's killing his guys. That emir just kind of evaporates from existence, and as well as the rest of his emirate. He sacks Aleppo, and he's coming back, and he's having these triumphs we've been talking about, and he's coming back with like Byzantine flags and like Roman eagles that were captured by the Saracens hundreds of years ago, like stuff we never thought we were going to see again. He's coming back with the old Christian relics. Here's a tile that has Jesus's face on it because it touched the Shroud of Turin or whatever. Here's John the Baptist's head. I got that. We're bringing that back. And people are going crazy for him because he's this amazing conquering hero. He's getting out there. We're attacking and we're winning for once. It's about time. And he leaves that small force outside Antioch. They end up taking the city. He doesn't even have to be there, and he can take the city. But he comes back, and he's this great hero, and everybody loves him, and he's getting these triumphs, and he's bringing the bringer of victories. But he decides, perhaps foolishly, that at some point he's going to stay home in Constantinople and try to administer his empire. And as we kind of talked about with, we made a Robert Baratheon reference a minute ago, but one of the things that kind of George Martin said inspired him to write Game of Thrones was that at the end of Lord of the Rings, Aragorn defeats Sauron, and then the last line is like, and then he rules as a great king for 20 years, and everybody loves him. And, Martin was like, there's not always a lot of crossover between being an awesome conqueror, being a badass military guy, catapulting heads at your enemies doesn't necessarily mean that you should be making zoning laws.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the flip side of Phokas is that he's not a great politician, as might be predictable based on his personality profile. He is not great at pacifying other constituents and sort of public opinion. So there's sort of...
He does still have to attend the Met Gala after he leads the parade to it. He's got to go there and schmooze with the...
Absolutely. So one problem is he issues a new gold coin, not to replace the existing ones, but like he can use it in addition to existing coins, and it's much lighter. It's kind of 1/12 lighter than the standard gold coin, and people see through that right away. They're like, you want to pay people and say it's the same salary, but it's less money. And it's pretty clear this is because these wars cost a lot of money and more than they necessarily bring in part because the Romans don't just devastate the lands and take everything from them. They want to rule them. So you kind of have to leave them in place. And because he's a military guy and because he's a little bit insecure, his regime is not necessarily completely safe in the capital from other elites who might be hovering around. He keeps his Armenian bodyguard in the capital, like wandering around the streets. And Constantinople doesn't really do that. Like, there's always the palace bodyguards. There might be garrisons sort of around the walls, but on the streets, there's no soldiers. And so this is very unpopular. And obviously soldiers be soldiers, they'll be drinking and gambling and doing whatever they do. And he like tries to put them to use at one point to sort of stage a a mock battle in the hippodrome for the crowds to enjoy, and they, like, a bunch of people panic that the soldiers are just going to attack them, and so a riot breaks out and people are running and getting trampled, and Nicephorus is there in the imperial box like, what is going on? And
but he's like kind of tone deaf, right? Because that has happened before. There was a time when like there was some riots under Belisarius, and Belisarius led troops into the hippodrome to like attack fans in the stands and stuff, and a lot of people died, and this is just kind of this tone deaf, everybody's like, oh, is that what we're doing again? Like, oh,
absolutely. And this is a guy
the emperor doesn't like us.
Yeah, well, he's a guy whose all the stories are about how he, you know, kills and punishes people, and he reacts very badly when people throw stones at him. You know, again, Constantinople.
Well,
I know. I mean, this is the thing. Constantinople, part of that deal that the emperor can be replaced is that people voice their displeasure, and clever emperors will sack their officials. You know, you come out and you go, I hear that, you know, you're unhappy. Let me fire the stupid, you know, city governor. And everybody cheers, and you say, don't worry, you know, I'll sort this out.
That's that politics degree, Robin. That's how
go.
we're still doing that today.
Yes.
There you go. Well, Phokas has none of that. You know, everyone who throws a stone has to be arrested and possibly executed, because that's a capital crime to try and, you know, injure the emperor.
It's a court martial. It's a military. He's a military guy, right?
Military discipline.
You can't throw stones at your commanding. You can't have a sergeant throwing stones at the general.
No, exactly. And so since he keeps getting, you know, pelted, he starts building a wall to reinforce the defenses of the palace. And the palace in Constantinople is blocked off from the public, obviously, but it isn't like a citadel or, you know, like the Tower of London or something. It isn't like an imposing structure. And so again, people find this very disconcerting. You know, he's kind of building a fortress so that he can go to and from the city without having to see the people, in a way. And he also upsets the church because, again, he wants everyone contributing towards the military effort. So he starts micromanaging their finances, which, as you can imagine, they don't like at all, and kind of lecturing them, you know, that a lot of rich Byzantines will found a monastic estate to sort of protect their family lands. You know, you don't want them broken up. So you say, oh, I've become a monk 5 years before I die. And, you know, and he starts saying, no, you know, that's not what monasteries are for. They're for serious, pious, you know, ascetics. And he says, if you really want to be a monk, you should live in poverty. And so, you know,
that doesn't work for them, huh?
No. So he's kind of being a general instead of being an emperor. And this causes a lot of unpopularity. His family, of course, don't necessarily follow the rules. So there's charges of hypocrisy when his brother and his father are kind of enjoying a lavish lifestyle that he's kind of criticizing other people for not having. And so, yeah, he very rapidly loses a lot of the popularity he had, at least in the capital.
I feel like there were plenty of like wealthy bishops and wealthy churches that were not interested in having the emperor lecture them that like Jesus lived in poverty.
100%.
Quoting scripture at them about how they should not have big, nice, expensive churches.
Absolutely.
That's not a recipe for success.
No. And so this ends up in very unusual circumstances leading to his death. So he has a nephew. You know, the Byzantine aristocracy all intermarry. So you won't necessarily be close to your nephew, but he just happens to have married your sister. And this is a guy who we know as John Tzimiskes. Tzimiskes is kind of an epithet, a nickname. But he is one of Nicephorus's sub-commanders, and he is a very, very daring general. And he's quite a different personality to Nicephorus. He's much more of a fun-loving, risk-taking, you know, flasher person. And
yeah, you had said with him, like he's handsome, and he's so John Tzimiskes is Nicephorus's sister's son. And yeah, you said he's handsome and he's charming and he gets along well with people. He plays the political game really well. He's attractive. He's everything that Nicephorus kind of isn't. And then even down into like, he's also a very successful military commander, but Nicephorus's victories go by the book that he wrote. These is the steps that you take to win the battle. You destroy the enemy like a machine, grinding them down. And And when John Tzimiskes wants to win a battle, it's like a daring maneuver. I'm going to do this really bold thing. I'm out here in front with my flag. Everybody follow me. And so very different personalities, very different fighting styles, very different everything. And they get along for a while. Like they kind of have a very successful working relationship when all of their aggression is pointed to the east.
Absolutely. And so John is made head of the Eastern Army, which is what Phokas was when he became emperor. Tzimiskes lobbied, to get Phokas made emperor. And then in 965, Tzimiskes disappears from the record. And so most likely he was caught doing something that Phokas didn't like, either political or, serious embezzlement or disobedience or something. And so Phokas... There are some rumors involving the Empress, I understand, as well. Well, so, so this is another thing, which I guess we'll come to in a second. But he is put under house arrest. The Byzantines tend to be very kind to one another in elite circles. So, he's sent to live with another rich, guy in Eastern Turkey, and, you stay there to be kept an eye on, but you're not really, you can still live a nice life. And so that's in 965. And in 969, this guy suddenly turns up on the other side of the Bosphorus with a conspiracy to murder the emperor. And so he's back in the record now. So he's back in the record. And one of the guys by his side is the guy who captured Antioch and was removed from command immediately. So you can see that, there is amongst the army circles of people who don't like Nikephoros, who've been put off, who think, wouldn't it be great if we were in charge? And then, in the palace, there are two people who are accused of conspiring against him. One is the Empress. And after the murder, the report is that she and Tzimiskes were lovers, that she, was interested in him and was happy to get rid of Phokas. It's entirely possible that is fiction, as we'll come to. Mm-hmm. But there's no particular reason to believe she was fond of Nikephoros. He was a much older man. She was not from an aristocratic background. She was from Constantinople. He's from the border. So, it's entirely possible that she wasn't that unhappy, in theory, to see him go. There's always, from her perspective, there's always the possibility he might accidentally push her sons down a well, and try to have a family of his own. But there's no evidence he did. The other person is the sort of head chief eunuch in the palace, who is a guy called Basil Lekapinos. And the Lekapinos family had been in power 20 years earlier. And they were the ones that Nikephoros' uncle had tried to usurp, basically. And so Basil, as a eunuch, had worked to get Phokas into power, and had probably done that in part to get himself back into power, because he had sort of fallen out of favor, as often happens. And it seems most likely that he's the man on the inside. He knows everyone. He's been there since he was a child. He was castrated as a baby in order to not threaten his family's other legitimate siblings. And so he knows everything, knows everyone, knows where everything is. And basically, Tzimiskes and his companions row across the Bosphorus at night. Under cover of darkness. This is very risky. And Basil has men on the walls, ironically next to the section that Phokas had built to protect himself in the palace. And they lower this basket down, and the men climb into the basket from the boat, from the shore, and are pulled up into the imperial bedchambers. And
now, I would imagine how many people does this basket hold? This is probably several trips.
Oh, several trips. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And this is all under cover of darkness. Ooh.
So as long as Basil has paid off...
Moonless night.
Yeah. I mean, as long as Basil's paid off the guards who are on that section of the wall and everyone's on board, then they're in the palace. Again, it's not a fortress. And he leads them to Phokas's bedchamber, and they go in and they draw the swords, and Phokas isn't there. There's no one in the bed. And so there's panic. because you're thinking, well, someone must have tipped him off, and this is a trap. And Basil says, no, don't worry. And they keep going, and they find him asleep in his prayer room. That he's been praying late at night and fallen asleep. And I like to think one of them said, that maybe we shouldn't. No, let's just kill him anyway. And
let's just do it. Yeah. Can we move him? We should move him. Just drag him out here.
Absolutely.
Take him out of the church. I don't want to do this in front of St. John.
So they run him through, and he's gone. And this is how well the conspiracy is planned. They cut his head off, and they rush to where the palace guards are. And this is the famous Varangian guard. So, Vikings from the north. And they show them the head. That's the first thing they do. Now you might think, what are you doing? You don't want to do that. But their point being, he's already dead. You can't protect him. So before you raise your axes, how about you get on board? And I suspect at that point, a very large bribe was promised. And Tzimiskes gets away with it, and he becomes emperor. And what happens next is that he blames Theophano. So he claims that she was behind it all, and she is sent off into a nunnery in exile, which is entirely sort of political cover. For we can't say the emperor was murdered and nobody got punished, so we'll blame her.
Throw her under the bus, yeah.
And so that makes scholars sort of suspect that she wasn't actually in love with Tzimiskes, that was a story put about to explain why would she do this. And it's pretty likely she didn't do it, that it was Basil the eunuch who planned all this, and she was the convenient scapegoat. And it's that
politics stuff we were talking about.
It's that politics stuff. And just to complete the story, to bring it, full circle to your Basil II episode, when her son comes of age and he does take the throne, he brings her back. So she has a slightly happier ending than we might expect.
And then that's Nikephoros Phokas does not have a happy ending, though.
He does not.
His head's cut off and
he was
paraded around.
He was 57. 57 years old, and he'd only been emperor for 6 years, but he had been the leading commander in the East for 15 years. So in a sense, he ran Byzantium's success for those 15 years. And in a way, a mark of his success is that Tzimiskes' reign was the first where the Romans were not raided at all by the Arab armies. And so that's telling. Kind of Phocas's legacy there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when word of his death gets to the Muslim world, they celebrate. There's much rejoicing in the Arab world at the news of his passing.
Absolutely.
And more interestingly, it's kind of what you had talked about before when we were talking about empresses taking over as regents and things. So John Tzimiskes, he's emperor, but he's co-emperor with Basil II, who's still only like 11 years old or something. And because Nikephoros Phokas had made so many enemies in Constantinople, nobody really was that mad about it. Everybody kind of reacted the same way the Armenians or the Varangian Guard did, where it's like, oh, the king is dead, long live the king. This is fine. This is probably fine.
Yeah,
it shows you a little bit about how they felt about him in the capital.
Exactly. I think there's no serious rioting in his favor, which tells you that the people kind of know that things are probably going to get better from their perspective. Tzimiskes is a very good politician. There are elements in the army who are very unhappy, and there are attempts to elevate Nikephoros' brother Leo. He has several coup attempts, but I think because his replacement is Tzimiskes, who is essentially from the same area of the state. He's also a general. He's from the same area in East Anatolia. I think there's a sense that the things people think are important about that will be maintained. You've still got a firm hand on the tiller. You've still got a general, but he'll undo the unpopular things. And that is what Tzimiskes does. Hey, don't worry, I won't interfere in the church. Don't worry. No new taxes, no new walls, and smooths things over pretty quick.
And so that is the end of Nikephoros Phokas, and it actually kind of dovetails very neatly into the Basil II episode, which I think we'll probably put up early on our feed so you can take a listen to that. Yes, he was a conqueror. He led the military for 14 years, never lost a battle, literally wrote the book on Byzantine military tactics. He's the pale death of the Saracens. He's described as being magnificent and insufferable, which I think are both ways that you would both adjectives you would describe for a badass, right? Like,
yes,
we've said multiple times on the show that badass is not necessarily always a positive thing. And he destroyed his enemies, and he pissed off all the rich people in Constantinople. Robin, what do you think is what's the takeaway from the story of Nikephoros Phokas? What's the lesson that aspiring badasses can take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, I like that a poet of the time wrote in favor of him, and one of the lines was, "You can tear my portraits off the wall, but my victories abide."
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think, the Romans were in the ascendant, so someone else could have won those victories, but he was unstoppable. And I think that the straightforward legacy is that there were no more raids. That when he took over, these raids and counter raids were going on. And by the time Basil II comes to power, that frontier is completely shut down. The Romans make Antioch their sort of forward base in Syria, and they turn Saif's home, Aleppo, into a protectorate, who has to ask permission, to do things from the Romans. So he completely transforms the eastern frontier. And if you lived on his estates, let's say, as an ordinary farmer, you'd have grown up as a child being told, if the Arabs come in summer, we're going to have to run. You're going to have to gather your stuff. These horrible, terrifying nightmares you're having. And as an old man or an old woman, you'd have thought it's all peaceful now, and we can cut down those trees and have another field, and no one's going to come and steal what we grow. And so, his badassery paid dividends for everyone.
Yes. And then Basil kind of deals with the Western Front, with the Bulgars. That's where he gets his cool nickname, the Bulgar Slayer. Not that we have any problem with Bulgarians. We love our Bulgarian listeners.
We
however,
do. We love our Bulgarians,
cool and we love our Saracen listeners as well. We love everybody, but cool nicknames are cool nicknames, and we like that. But then Basil's reign is 50-something years, and it's this golden age of Byzantine history, because both the borders are secure now, and they can have this kind of resurgence of power back to kind of the good old days for a little while. Robin, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really awesome to have you here and to help us tell the story. I'm going to ask you the question that I'm sure you're really tired of hearing, but we are at a point with the History of Byzantium podcast now where Constantinople has fallen, and it's the end of that. Is anybody emailing you like, hey, have you considered doing the history of the Ottoman Empire? Kind of the way, handing off the torch the way that you took it from History of Rome, or what's next?
Yeah. Oh, everyone's emailing me that. Yeah.
Damn, I was gonna try to pitch that at the end of this episode.
No, I think realistically, I'm going to go and lie on the floor in a heap for a while, having finished the podcast, and then I will be back. So there's more Byzantium to come. People have lots of questions. So what's the aftermath of 1453 and what comes next? And I will cover a little bit of Ottoman history. But I won't be giving them the year-by-year treatment I've given the Romans. Most likely the next project is to go back to the earlier empire and kind of dig into some of the big questions there. But I've learned not to look too far ahead, so we'll take it one step at a time.
All right. Well, congratulations on completing the series, because that is a massive decade-long undertaking. So congratulations on making it to the end.
Congratulations.
Thank you for having me on, guys. It's been great.
And Robin, I know that you've led trips to Turkey in the past, focusing on Byzantine sites. Are there more on the horizon?
Yes, absolutely. If anyone wants to go to Turkey with me, the tours will run as long as there are listeners who want to go, and you can see where Phokas was killed and where he was crowned, and all sorts of other places.
And you also this is 2025, so you have an Etsy site.
Yeah.
Is that true? Imperial Wares?
That's right. Technically, no, that's not my Etsy site. It's a
okay.
But he and I have collaborated on Byzantium themed T-shirts, including a podcast T-shirt. So if you are that geeky, you can have a History of Byzantium podcast T-shirt, and you can get it from Etsy /shop/Imperial Wares WARES. And yeah, go to the historyofbyzantium.com and email me if you want tour information. There's a page there, but get on the mailing list and I'll tell you all about it.
All right. Robin Pierson, thank you so much for being on the show. It's awesome having you here. Congratulations on the podcast. And thank you for talking to us about a Byzantine badass who for me was, I didn't know that much about him. Like, it was kind of a little bit of a gray area for me before I heard him on your podcast. So I was very excited to have you come and tell the story to the listeners today. So thank you so much. And I guess thank you to everybody out there listening to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please do go check out the History of Byzantium podcast, and we'll post links to stuff on our site. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.